History is the great equalizer between men. It is the vindicator of truth, the abstainer of fault, and the condemner of falsehood and oppression. History shows us over and over again that those who have, for example, during their own lifetimes, suffered defeat, suffered loss, and even within their own life were socially ostracized or not very well recognized or received. Their legacy lived on through the generations, and eventually, people or the world came to know of their greatness or the amazing things that they'd done. They weren't necessarily vindicated within their own lifetimes, but history came to show just how great their achievements were. On the other hand, those who engaged in oppression, those who repressed others, those who were corrupt and engaged in all kinds of falsehood, although within their own lifetimes they may have reaped the rewards of their comfort, their lack of effort, and the lack of willingness to stand by what is right, history shows that they will be defiled and defamed for what they truly were. In other words, those who, whether they were defiled in their lifetimes, whether they were forgotten and neglected, or whether they received the rewards of what they did, history is the equalizer between all men and will serve to bring justice to the legacies for generations to come. We can see this in various examples throughout history and throughout the generations. One example I can think of is the great German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, during his own lifetime, his works were not very well received, and he wasn't a particularly, let's just say, well read author. He succumbed to madness and insanity, and for the last 10 years of his life, he lived as a crippled. And yet, after his lifetime, which is very ironic and rather tragic in a sense, but also great in another sense, his words have inspired millions, if not billions, of people, and his legacy will probably live on for a very, very long time, even after we're gone. There are others that one can think of. Martin Luther King, for example, or Abraham Lincoln, or the more we even go back in history, I can think of examples, for example, from Islamic theology or Islamic history. For example, the great Hadith scholar and jurist Ahmed ibn Hanbal, when he stood up to the Mu'tazila, their inquisition, their reign of terror, and he ended up becoming a hero for traditionalist Muslims and for most Muslims across the world, and for the majority of the Muslim world who are Sunnis. And the Mu'tazila succumbed ultimately and in their original form went extinct. And just as a point here, inquisitions very rarely ever work. You may try hard to oppose certain people, certain contrarians who are brave enough to speak the truth or speak to power in certain areas. You may silence people, you may order their assassinations, yet history will vindicate that they are right, and you yourself, your ideology, your ideas, your school of thought may inevitably end up dying off if you are not careful and if you engage in corruption. History has a weird way of vindicating people and vindicating different groups. The Jews, for most of history, were considered they were extremely discriminated against. They were targeted constantly. They were consistently treated very poorly. And yet, inevitably, it turns out, that they are a great people with great achievements and great contributions to mankind as a whole. We see currently, for example, as well, where 20 years ago we had the war on terror, let's say, or right now we had various killings, ethnic killings and genocides of innocent people in Palestine, in, Darfur, in the Congo, in Sudan. We had attacks on different groups of people with ethnic intent, and this kind of ethnic cleansing sort of program within, let's say, South Africa as well, in various other places. Various different groups have been persecuted throughout their lifetimes within the broader scale of history. And yet history always has a weird way of vindicating these groups. In 20 years from now, I imagine that everybody would have always been against the killing of innocent people in Palestine, the killing of innocent people in Congo, the killing of innocent people in Sudan, in South Africa, in anywhere across the globe. But the difference is that history will remember those who stood up when it was happening and those who were complicit and silent and allowed the establishment to get away with its crimes. And so, really and truly, if we look at the grand scale of history, some may say that it is written by the winners, but I may venture to say that it is oftentimes those who lost, quote unquote, in their own lifetimes, who inevitably on the grand scale of history were remembered as the just, the pious, the intelligent, and the brave.